This is John for Global Traveler Magazine. Today I have the pleasure of talking travel with travel journalist Ash Bhardwaj. How are you, sir?
I'm really good, thanks, John. Thanks very much for having me on. Great to chat to you.
Well, I appreciate your time. Where are you right now?
I am in South London. I'm in an area called Battersea, sort of halfway between Clapham and the river. So we've got park up at one end, park at the other, and then the Thames. It's a good place, easy to get around to different parts of London. And London's great because it's a really good travel hub, particularly getting all around the UK on the trains, and of course into Europe on the trains as well.
Sure, sure. Well, you're interested in travel. You're a travel journalist. You've written a book, Why We Travel, and we're certainly going to get to that. You didn't start off being interested in travel. You started off being interested in science and space.
Yeah, I started off being quite a space geek. My really close friend of the family actually worked for JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is a basically R&D division for NASA. They actually built and launched America's first satellite, Explorer 1. So he was working at JPL in the 80s and 90s and actually still works for JPL as a consultant now. And that was a very exciting time for space because there's a lot of discovery, a lot of firsts happening. So it was a thrilling and exciting time. And also I loved Star Trek. So those are the sort of groundings of science. But I mean, what makes science interesting is it's about discovery and curiosity. And when I did my first travel experience at the age of 17, I went on a rugby tour to Australia, New Zealand, and the Cook Islands. I grew up in Windsor. I didn't actually play rugby when I was a kid, and I went to the local state school, and which is what you guys in the States call a public school, as in it's funded by the state. And my mum found out about this rugby tour that was happening. We lived in social housing. Mum was on income support. She took a second job as a cleaner to pay for my ticket, and I just had to learn how to play rugby. So I had this incentive to basically go onto a field and effectively get beaten up for 80 minutes. That's mostly what rugby does. But it got me to New Zealand, which really made me aware of places that look quite familiar or similar to home on the outside can be extremely different. New Zealand, being a British colonized nation, has an amazing history. The indigenous culture is still very prominent in New Zealand, which is quite unusual for a British colonized nation. And that just made me fascinated, made me curious about the world, about history, about culture and geography, identity and place. And that really is where the travel bug really bit me. And it was rooted in curiosity.
So you've done a lot of travel in your life. How did you come to be to write a book? Why We Travel?
I think, like many of us, after the pandemic, I was much more conscious about my travel. I was thinking about, you know, we'd had effectively 2 years of not being able to travel, and therefore thinking about how I wanted to use my time and my travel more effectively when it could start again. And by that point, I was also a bit more conscious of the impact of my carbon footprint when I travel, the impact of my choices on the environment that I visited, the communities and societies that I visited. What impact did the money that I spend have? Because if you looked around the world at a lot of tourism areas during the pandemic, they were really heavily damaged,
Right.
or not damaged, but you know, those businesses fell
Sure.
apart. So tourism can have this really positive impact, but it can also have a detrimental impact because it makes areas completely dependent on something that they can't really influence. And also you have really negative impact tourism in some places. So I was thinking about all these things, the positive and the negatives. What could I do? How did I want to travel if I was going to go back to doing it? So I thought about all the travel that I'd done from my first trip as a rugby player all the way through to the final piece that I wrote about in the book, which is about taking my mum's ashes to New Zealand as a journey that turned grief into hope. And then I interviewed loads of people. So my friends that traveled a lot, scientists, anthropologists, philosophers, explorers, soldiers, athletes, about what their motivations were for travel. And then I also looked a lot into psychology and sociology. You know, where did these motivations come from that make us travel? Why did humans start traveling in the first place? We are a migratory species, so it's kind of like deeply rooted in our instincts. And then I just mapped my travels, all these other things that I'd come across, stuff from poetry, stuff from literature. What were the common themes? And identify 12 motivations for travel. So I was kind of doing that out of my own interest to just travel better when I started traveling again. And I realized this would be quite useful to other people. So I started to write it down and start to codify it a bit more, and then shared it with my friends, asked them for their insights and their impact. And it's kind of went from there. And that's how the book ended up being written. And the whole point of the book is to, I mean, it's a blend of memoir, travelogue, research, science, recommendations, interviews, and philosophy to create this smart thinking book. And the idea is to help anyone that reads it to think about their own travel in a deeper way, so that when they do travel, however they travel, it's more fulfilling. So it's about making the most out of your time when you do travel. It's a series of questions you can ask yourself before you go somewhere to figure out, what do I want from this trip, or what could I do on this trip? And then when you're on that trip, what are the things you can keep doing to maintain that mindset? Because we all travel for different reasons at different times. Sometimes you might just need, you want to just go and have fun. You just want to go and enjoy yourself and, I don't know, drink tequilas, or so drink margaritas down in Mexico. Or sometimes you might want to go and raft the river and do something really difficult in the wilderness up in Canada. And other times you might want to have a really deep cultural insight. You might want to go and learn tango in Argentina. Or you might want to go and meditate and learn about Buddhism or Hinduism in India or Thailand. And we call all of these things travel, but they're very, very different. And it's understanding that there's not a right way to travel, and each person doesn't have their mode of travel. It's not like a star sign. You're not like the curious traveler or the hardship traveler. This year, you might need to travel for healing. Next year, you might want to travel for eroticism, which isn't sex tourism. It's about like getting the understanding of a different culture. It's about the gap between self and other. So it's using all of these different ways of thinking to make your travel better.
And what did you learn about yourself or yourself in relation to travel through the writing process?
I think one of the best ways to make sense of your own thoughts is to write it down. You know, I've been writing as a journalist for about 12 or 13 years. I've just done my second degree. I did a master's in strategic communication, which is all about beliefs and behaviors. And throughout my time as an army officer, I've had to write as well. So I'm quite used to putting things down on paper. My first degree was philosophy. So it's very much like, what am I interested in? How do I turn that into an idea? And then strategic communications was a lot related to travel and identity and culture. How do you figure out what influences those things? So it was just following my own interests and pushing it through. But what I found most interesting was, as I reflected on my own journeys, not only did I relive those journeys and enjoy them a second time, but I took new things from them. So in 2018, I'd been serving with the British Army in Estonia on basically a long-term NATO mission to deter Russian aggression. And I was curious about what are the things that shape identity in Estonia. And then I did a 6-month journey from the top of Norway to Russian-occupied Crimea in 2018, visited Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, Estonia, 14 regions and countries along that border, and interviewed people about how they felt, why they felt, what stories mattered to them. And what I realized is I didn't agree with everything that I encountered, but I developed an ability to empathize with it, to acknowledge it and understand why those beliefs existed for that person in that place. And empathy wasn't something I'd considered to be an important part of travel. Like, I kind of understood it was important to learn about other cultures and recognize that different places behave or think differently and have different belief systems. But developing that empathy through travel, I hadn't considered that as a really important motivation. But once I reflected on that journey, it's now become a much more integral part of my travel. I might travel to places which have political and social beliefs that are very different to my own. And it doesn't mean I will go there and argue with those people. I've chosen to visit that place. may
Sure.
not agree with everything, and it's important to just get a bit of an insight. Why do people believe this in this place?
Interesting. Now, as you know, we talked a little bit before we started recording, and I said I have not read the book yet. But when I came across you online, it fascinated me because the book seems to me it's part memoir, as you said, part travelogue, part thought provoking. Was that your intent when you started to write it, to kind of not be as specific, not just be a travelogue, to kind of incorporate all those things in, or did that come about through the writing process?
That's, I think you've really got to the heart of what I've tried to do with the book, actually, John, which is I've loved growing up reading a lot of travel writing, and I've often been inspired by it. And what I find with a lot of travelogues is you can learn a bit about the person and their biography, and you can learn something interesting about a specific place or a specific way of travel. Might be traveling on foot, or on kayak, or cycling, and it might be about a specific route or a region. There's not a huge amount you can then apply to your own life afterwards. It's called armchair travel. You've enjoyed it, and maybe it will give you some insights about traveling to that place. But it's not like a toolbox. And then on the other hand, you've got guides, which is based on the information about a specific place or a specific time. What I was hoping I could teach people through the book is the mindsets that can be universal for them. And it's teaching them the tools that they can apply before setting out on any journey to figure out what motivation matters. And then also it suggests a series of behaviors and actions you can do when you're in a place to make the most out of it. And if you reflect on your own travels, this will be familiar to you. There'll be times when you've not done anything, you've not ticked things off a bucket list, or you've not taken the kind of photos that everyone takes in a place, but you've thought to yourself, that was a compelling and amazing experience. Why? So I sort of try to codify that and think about what are the structures of it. And the kind of books that have really shaped my thinking have been books such as The Art of Travel by Alain de Botton. There was another book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. There was a book called Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall. And what all of these books do, and then on the other hand, you've kind of got sort of self-help, self-development
Sure.
books like, I don't know, The 4 Hour Week by Tim Ferriss, or at the sort of complete utilitarian end, although that has some philosophy within it as well. So it was about, how do I do that mix? How do I inform people, explain something complex clearly, which is human motivation and psychology, how it intersects with something that dominates our lives? I, I don't know quite what the stats are in America, but in Britain, we spend more on travel than any other leisure activity, even going to the pub, if you believe that.
Oh,
And Brits like going to the pub. So it's a big thing in our lives. And one of the differences in the US is there's a lot more domestic travel just because there's so much to see in the
right.
US. It's a remarkable place. But travel dominates our lives. So this is a really important thing, but we rarely think about, how do we do this better? How does this underpin our lives? So what I wanted to do with the book was use the experience of others, my own experience, to help teach people how they might be able to make it more fulfilling. So you're right, I had set out with that smart thinking approach, and I've tried to kind of carve a new subgenre, which at the moment, I call smart travel, but I'm sure somebody who's better at marketing than me will come up with a better term for it, John.
We'll call it whatever you want. It does intrigue me, and I do look forward to reading the book. What places have you been that you really enjoyed? Like the top two or three places that you just loved?
So a few places I've been that really stand out to me. New Zealand means an enormous amount to me. It was the first place that I traveled and had a real adventure. I'd kind of been to the Netherlands where my uncle used to live. I'd done family trip to India when I was about 8 or 9, but it was the first overseas adventure, and I'd gone on a rugby tour with all of my mates, and it changed my life. It's a fascinating place. It set that fire of curiosity alive in me, and I've returned 4 times since. I lived there for a period of time. I went back and played rugby, trained as a ski instructor, meant a lot to my mum, and I've seen a lot of the country, and I've been really interested in understanding more about Maori being the indigenous people, but also just wider Kiwi culture. And that it's got a unique biculturalism. The landscape is phenomenal. And it's a place that has been my family's life is deeply connected with it. I've still got relatives that live over there. So New Zealand is just such a wonderful place. Incredibly good wine as well, and beer, and
It's important.
and yes, sailing. They're great at everything in New Zealand. Brilliant. Says New Zealand. Northern California, the redwood forests are some of the heading up into the Cascade Mountains in that area. It is
Beautiful.
remarkable,
Yeah.
absolutely awesome. Love it. Japan fascinates me because it's a place that, on the surface, people get fascinated with Japan because of the sort of, Harajuku girls and the sort of weird fetish stuff that people get interested in about Japan. But, deep beneath that is just a really interesting culture that is very different to other places in the world, and that it's modernized whilst having retained um, lots of its heritage and its culture in quite unusual ways. Lots of challenges within the country, and opportunities as well. So, and ramen is amazing. And Japan's also just beautiful, the landscape. India is an amazing country to travel. It's quite hard work if you're not used to traveling in countries that are quite culturally different. It's very busy. And it's also a country that is developing it so fast. Every time I go back, I can't believe how different the cities in particular are and the infrastructure is. And in terms of a country where you can access spirituality and novel ways of thinking and actually detach from the modern world and go off and do things just through the vastness and that ancient history that is still alive, India is amazing for it. And then it's not a place I'd recommend visiting today, but Ukraine is an incredible country. I traveled there in 2018. I love it. I found it a warm, welcoming, exciting place. A place that really, in 2018, it was 4 years since the Revolution of Dignity, where they sort of cast off the first round of Russian oppression and sort of interference. And then, of course, Russia invaded Crimea and Donbass the first time. But there's this real just sense of identity and positivity and seizing the moment and optimism in the country about forging its own way. The sort of young, excited mindset in Ukraine in 2018. The landscape's amazing. Went to Donbass in 2018. Even Donbass was pretty cool. Like, it reminded me of sort of kind of post-industrial landscapes you'd see in South Wales or parts of the Appalachians, where you kind of had rewilding, and it's quite beautiful. And amazing monasteries. Yeah, I'm very fond of Ukraine. That was my favorite country in Europe until 2022 to visit.
Very interesting. All excellent choices. I've been to a few of them, but I'd like to hit the rest of them at some point.
Which ones have you been to?
I've been to I've been to California, the redwoods, and I've been to parts of England.
Oh,
I
awesome.
was a lot younger during the England ones. I don't remember a whole lot about it, but hopefully sometime I will get back there.
Oh, amazing. Great.
Before I let you go, tell everybody where they can find out more information about why we travel and your whatever else, your website.
Yeah, I mean, my website is www.ashbhardwaj.com. That's ASHBHARDWAJ.com. And the book is called Why We Travel, A Journey into Human Motivation. I'm not sure about its availability in the US right now. What I do know is friends of mine over in the US have managed to order it from Amazon.co.uk. And there's a few other websites that can ship over. And actually, the shipping is about $10, which, I mean, you'd rather not, but it's not that bad for a hardback.
For hardback, not bad.
Yeah, and it's on Audible. You can find me on Instagram at Ash Bhardwaj, spelled the same, ASHBHARDWAJ. And I think if you just Google Why We Travel Ash Bhardwaj, there'll be a few other bits and pieces that have popped up, appearances on TV shows and radio and that sort of thing.
Well, Ash, I really appreciate your time. Like I said before and during the interview, the book fascinates me. I haven't read it yet. I will be getting a copy. I'll be looking to find one. Why we travel? Obviously I'm in the travel industry as part of the magazine, and it's a fascinating topic to delve into why we travel. I know I travel here for business. I travel here for pleasure, but like you said, to get more out of it, to get what you want out of it. it's a fascinating topic, and I really look forward to diving in.
Just you mentioned something there that a friend of mine did recently. A friend of mine who actually briefly appears in the book. He traveled to Bangalore and he just finished reading Why We Travel. And he said, I'm going to Bangalore on business, but I want to use some of the ideas from the book. How can I do that? And I said, well, what can you do in the margins in that time around your business meetings and the time you have to go to bed? And what are the things you really want to learn? He said, well, I just want to know what makes Bangalore different to, say, Delhi. I'm like, brilliant. So the 5 things that you want to think about kind of really define a place. You've got the landscape, then you've got the language, you've got the food, and then you've got the religion and the sport. So those are sort of 5 things. If you think about them, that kind of gives you a bit of a sense of the culture. And Bangalore, for example, the thing that makes it really different is the food, the landscape, and the language. That's what makes it different from Delhi or another part of India. So it's like, oh, brilliant. And then the religion actually is slightly different because you've got a different flavor of Hinduism down there to what you have in the north. They worship different gods are more prominent. And he just used that to go and visit restaurants and temples and went to go and watch the cricket in the evening and found that as a way to give him a sense of Bangalore or Bengaluru, as it's also known, within like a window of 4 hours every evening. And he's like, I read the book and I just tried to apply it. And he said, I just had this amazing sense of the city that I wouldn't have had I gone. So it's what you can do around all of those trips, I think is really compelling and fun.
That's the exact concept. Obviously, you summarized it much better than I could. That's the exact concept of what I got out of why I wanted to talk to you, because I just found that to be such an interesting angle on travel. And I so appreciate your time. I encourage everyone to check out Ash Bhardwaj online, check out the book, and I appreciate your time, sir.
John, thanks very much, mate. Thank you very much for asking me. It's lovely to chat about it.
I hope to do this again.
Yeah, love to. Cheers,
Have a
mate.
good day, sir.